As this mentions, she's the policy director at NYU Furman Center, which is really committed to advancing the dialogue, related to housing, neighborhoods, urban development. So it's very key to our whole focus here. And I don't know if I should just read what we have up here for everyone to look at, but I mean, reiterating this, she's worked as a research associate and graduate student at the Turner Center for Housing Innovation at UC Berkeley. She's also had roles as a project manager and case manager for a community-based organization in the Bronx where she focused on eviction prevention, homelessness, and healthcare. And she has a master's degree from the Goldman School of Public Policy at UC Berkeley. So I'm really eager, to get some of your insights here about what you're seeing and maybe even more about how this could be something for Detroit to kind of apply in its mechanism as well. Thank you.
All right. Great. So thank you so much for that introduction and everything that's been said today. As folks have said, my name is Hayley Raetz, and I am the policy director at the NYU Furman Center. And so first, I just really want to thank the Center for Equitable Family and Community Wellbeing and all of their partners for hosting this event today. It's a really important event. Over the past year, as has been mentioned, I've had the pleasure of connecting with Professor Shanks, David, the whole team, to learn more about their vision for bringing together data and analysis on Detroit's housing, neighborhoods, and residents. And I'm really, really excited about the vision and the work that's underway. So today, I'm going to talk about the Furman Center's annual flagship State of the City report, which we have produced for the last 25 years. I wasn't there the whole 25 years, but the report focuses on New York City's housing and neighborhoods, and it's really become a key resource for policymakers, nonprofits, journalists, researchers, and many others in our community. And I have to say the report represents dozens of data sets, and it totals over 500 figures. And what we've found is that this data infrastructure has become a central resource for understanding, evaluating, and really determining housing policy and outcomes. So I just have to say my understanding is that this presentation is intended to give insight and just move the conversation forward in this room about what kinds of data collaboration, analysis, and reporting could be most useful in the context of Detroit. But I'm going to talk about New York, but I think we should have that in mind during this presentation. All right, so this is the agenda. I'm going to start with a quick overview of the Furman Center and our mission. I'm going to walk through the State of the City report itself and talk through some interesting figures that we have. Then I want to discuss our data partners who are really central to the work of bringing this report to fruition. And after that, I'm going to talk about how people actually use it and the impact that it has. All right. The Furman Center, just really quickly, is an academic research center that's located at NYU that is focused on housing and urban policy. And so our goal is to produce work that is rigorous and evidence-based, but also useful for real-world policy and decision-making. We were founded in 1995, and we have a focus on bringing together a bunch of disciplines. So we're co-located at the Wagner School of Public Service and the NYU Law School, and our team brings together economists, lawyers, data scientists, and policy analysts to study housing and urban policy. And our work is really organized around these four main areas that you see here. So affordable housing, land use, housing finance, and neighborhood change. At a high level, our mission is to produce rigorous research that informs scholarship as well as policy and practice. We also build tools and resources to make data more accessible for policymakers, researchers, journalists, and stakeholders. A central part of our mission is also training students and early career researchers. I get to work with grad students. It's one of my favorite parts of my job. And then we also convene people across sectors to encourage healthy debate and advance creative policy solutions. And we've been doing this work for about 30 years. We've built a really large body of work, including more than 100 different indicators that we report on in our State of the City report, which is a great segue. So the State of the City report is really our flagship product, and it's where we bring together a lot of our data in one place. It started 25 years ago, and it was actually a response to policymakers and government staff and members of the public who were coming to the Furman Center with data questions. And so the idea was really to create something that policymakers and others could turn to as a resource using the existing data repositories at the center. So we had all this data we were using for our own research. And the idea was, why don't we make this more public and more accessible? This is the cover of the original report, which was led by Glennis Daniels and Michael Schill. The report has a few key components, and I'm going to walk through them today, and hopefully we can think about what would be helpful in Detroit. So we actually have 3 kind of narrative topic chapters, which cover the state of the city's housing stock, the state of renters and their homes, and then also homeowners and their homes. We also have separate pages for citywide and borough-level data, as well as detailed data and figures for each of the city's 59 community districts. Every year, we draft a focus report, which covers a different topic that we judge to be timely that year. So in 2024, for example, we looked at the use of Section 8 housing choice vouchers. Those are a lifeline for about 123,000 households in New York City. And the report included a close look at the characteristics of the neighborhoods and the buildings in which those voucher holders were actually living. We also looked at the challenges that new voucher holders were facing as they were trying to lease up, which is actually really challenging. So you wait all this time, you finally get this voucher, and then it's really hard to use it, which can be heartbreaking. So the State of the City report is also really closely connected to Core Data NYC, which is our interactive housing and neighborhood database. And it draws on many of the same data sources, but it allows people to kind of access and interact with that data much more directly. All right, so let's take a look at each of these components in a little bit more detail. I'm going to start with the topic chapters. As I mentioned, we have housing stock, renters, and homeowners. And what they're trying to do is give kind of a clear and up-to-date picture of the city and how it's changed over time. So this figure here is from our chapter on renters, and it's one that I use all the time. It's one that we use when we're talking about the city's affordability challenges. So all the way off to the side here, you can see that just over half of renter households were rent burdened in 2023. So those are households that are spending 30% or more of their income on rent. And you can see that that share hasn't really budged that much over the last decade. But what I think is important about this chart is that that citywide number really obscures the extent to which lower income households are facing burdens. Among extremely low income households, so those who are earning 30% or less of area median income, or AMI, 86% of households were rent burdened. So most people are rent burdened in that category. I also just want to note that these figures are interactive. So if you were on our site and you wanted to know the exact shares, you could click on this figure and get all of the underlying data. All right, this is another figure I like. It's a figure from our topic chapter on the city's housing stock. And what it does is it tracks government subsidized units targeted to households earning 80% or less of AMI, as well as market rate units that are built between 2010 and 2024. And so what I think this figure shows is that you can see that the number of completed affordable units is really remaining steady over time, around 5,000 units per year. And that's likely due to the fact that subsidies are limited, and they're pretty stable over time. And then you can see how the market rate development is fluctuating a lot more. And that's in response to different policy and economic shifts. So one of the most widely used parts of the report is the neighborhood data profiles. And these provide a massive amount of data for each of the city's 59 community districts so that people have a better understanding of a specific neighborhood, they can see how it's changed over time, and they can also compare metrics between neighborhoods. The neighborhood data profiles include detailed tables with information on topics like demographics, renters and rental conditions, housing, neighborhood services and conditions, and a lot of other topics. And this is a segment of one of those tables, and that's focused on renters and rental conditions. And so this table allows folks to see both current levels, but also trends over time, which is really important. And so this table is from our page on the Bedford-Stuyvesant neighborhood in Brooklyn. We call it Bed-Stuy. And you can see that the median rent in this neighborhood, and this is after adjusting for inflation, was $980 in 2000, and it has since risen to $2,070 in 2023. The median rent for recent movers, which is going to give us more insight into what we think of as asking rent. So if you're moving into this neighborhood, if you're moving within the neighborhood, that's the rent that you'd be facing on a new unit, has risen from $1,650 in 2010 to $2,790 in 2023. So again, huge shifts. And you can see how these figures would be really useful, say to a council member that wants to track changes in their neighborhood over time and see how it's changing. But also a resident who's trying to understand what's happening in their neighborhood and what they're seeing around them. Our neighborhood data profiles also feature interactive figures on these same topics. So I'm going to just stay in Bed-Stuy here. This is a figure from our neighborhood demographics section, and it shows how the racial and ethnic composition of the neighborhood has changed since 2000. As you can see, this is a historically Black neighborhood, and the share that is Black has dropped dramatically over the last 2 decades, from 75% to 41%. At the same time, the share of the population that is white has increased from about 2% to 27%. So again, huge demographic shifts are happening in this neighborhood. We also show metrics like poverty rates, and we compare them to citywide benchmarks. And I think this is important to think about how neighborhoods actually differ from each other. So here you can see the poverty rate among residents of Bed-Stuy was about 26% in 2023. Citywide, about 18% of people live below the federal poverty line. But something I think is important about this figure is that you can see the extent to which poverty and also wealth is really concentrated in certain neighborhoods in New York City. So on the far left of this figure, you have the financial district and Greenwich Village, Soho. That's actually where NYU is located. They both have a poverty rate of about 5%. On the far right, you have Belmont, East Tremont, and Morrisania, Crotona in the South Bronx, where about 40% of people are in poverty. So we have really kind of a huge segregation by income in the city. So those previous figures were really drawing on data from the Census Bureau. But to create this figure, which is an index of price appreciation figure, we're relying on sales data from the New York City Department of Finance that has then been cleaned by the city's Department of Housing, Preservation, and Development, and they give those data to us, which we're extremely grateful for. And so here we're indexing sales prices for different types of properties to a starting date. And we have 2009 selected here, but you can actually go back further on our website. And we use a hedonic price model. So what that does is it allows us to control for differences in the types and characteristics of properties that are being sold in a given year. And we're tracking the change in price in real terms over time. So this is adjusted for inflation. And this figure shows that across all types of homes sold in Bed-Stuy, sales prices have increased by about 200% since 2009. Again, that's after adjusting for inflation. So each year, we also do a focus report on a specific topic. In 2025, so last year, with the city facing potentially large cuts to federal funding, we thought it was really important to cover the role of federal housing programs in New York City. And what we found is that New York City relies on more than $7.2 billion annually from the federal government's major housing and homelessness programs alone. The most significant amounts of that funding are allocated to support public housing, project-based rental assistance, and Section 8 housing choice vouchers. So as this figure shows, in 2024, federal funding accounted for 3/4 of the operating budget of the New York City Housing Authority, so it's public housing. the majority of the operating budget of the Department of Housing Preservation and Development, and a significant share of the Department of Homeless Services operating budget. So what we tried to do in this report is really shed light on the fact that federal funds are actually foundational to affordability, public housing operations, and homelessness services in the city, and that those proposed federal cuts would have extremely severe impacts on the very low-income residents that were served by those programs. I just want to talk about Core Data NYC. It's our online platform where people can explore the data that's underlying the State of the City report themselves. So it's designed to make fairly complex data easy to use. And it has two modules. So the one that you're seeing right here is the subsidized housing database. And it's a geocoded database of nearly every subsidized housing development in New York City. For each property, we have a bunch of information. So we have information on the political and administrative districts in which it's located, the number of income-restricted affordable units by income level, indicators of its physical and financial condition, and the subsidy programs and regulatory agreements tied to the property. Core data also includes neighborhood indicators that provide data on a range of metrics and conditions for various geographies in New York City, like the poverty rate or the homeownership rate. And so you can map those across the city and dive down into the details of a specific neighborhood yourself. I also want to say really quickly that we try to actively engage with the public around this report. So every year we celebrate the release of the report with a launch event. We have a presentation of our findings and a panel discussion. And the report and Core Data NYC are generously funded by an annual grant from the city, as well as donations from a variety of organizations in the field. So the State of the City report would not be possible without our data partners and the wide range of data sources that they provide us. Behind the State of the City report is a substantial data infrastructure. In total, we're drawing on about 40 different data sets. I just put some examples on this slide, and it's a subset of those data, and it spans key aspects of the housing system. So this includes lending data required by the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, or HMDA, data on property sales, data on the use of low-income housing tax credits to finance affordable housing. We're also analyzing data on building permits and housing completions to track production, along with housing complaints and violations to allow us to assess conditions on an ongoing basis. To understand housing stability, we're also incorporating detailed housing court data, pre-foreclosure and foreclosure notices, and we also have detailed data that we're literally scraping from PDFs online on rent stabilization. Some of these data sets are publicly available, but others we're accessing through personal contacts at agencies. And we actually have access to protected data with sensitive information like that housing court data via data use agreements. So together, these and other data sets really allow us to provide a comprehensive view of housing conditions, production, and affordability in the city. We also rely heavily on partnerships to access the data that makes this work possible. So I just wanted to highlight a subset of all of our data partners and data sources. At the federal level, we're drawing on data sources like those from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, the U.S. Census Bureau, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics. At the state level, we're drawing on data from the New York State Department of Homes and Community Renewal, and we're partnering with the Office of Court Administration to receive granular protected data on housing court proceedings. At the local level, we're partnering with and sourcing data from agencies including the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development, the Department of City Planning, the Department of Finance, the Department of Buildings, New York City Housing Authority, the NYPD, and the Department of Education, just to name a few. And then we're supplementing these sources with select data from private entities, such as foreclosure records. Again, these sources are helping us create a more comprehensive and reliable picture of housing in the city. So I have to say the State of the City report is a really significant undertaking for us. It requires coordination and effort across the entire team. And every year, we're also trying to strengthen the reports. We're trying to do new things and move that ball forward with each new edition. But we think that that effort is worth it. One of the things that we're most proud of, actually, is how widely the report is used. It's really become a go-to resource, and we think that it helps support more informed public conversations and policymaking. So, who uses the State of the City? We have a wide range of audiences. We actually know that policymakers and their staff have old versions. We used to release a book of this report, and they would have old versions of the book from every year in their offices that they would use as a reference. Now we have a fully online version, and they use that. Community boards, which in New York City are made up of residents in each community district, are also relying on our data to better understand their neighborhoods and make decisions for their communities. Community organizations and nonprofits are relying on it to describe the neighborhoods they serve to funders, to their own board, and to their constituents. The report is also frequently cited in the media, and journalists often come to us to ask for additional analysis that's building on what we've already published. Teachers and professors will direct their students to the report for their own classwork, actually. And then more broadly, we know that members of the public are coming to our website for accessible and introductory information about housing in the city and to learn more about the neighborhoods in which they live. So to make sure that the State of the City report and Core Data NYC continue to reach these audiences, we provide like a handful of webinars and trainings each year to the public and also to specific groups. So for example, we've given trainings tailored to the staff of policymakers and also to tenant organizers. So this is actually an image of my former colleague, Nikki Miller, and she's giving a presentation on Core Data NYC at the NYC School of Data, which is an annual conference hosted by Beta NYC, and it brings together New Yorkers to explore how data can be better used to understand and improve the city. So one way that we see the report's impact is how it's used in the media. For example, this is a recent New York Times article. These are really fun articles. I don't know if you've seen them, but they actually talk about a family in New York and how they budget and afford to live in a very expensive city. And so in this article, our neighborhood data profiles were used to describe the demographics of the Upper West Side. So journalists are often relying on our data as a trusted and neutral source of data, and they build on our work in their coverage. We also see our data used by government entities. So in a final report by the New York City Charter Revision Commission that was released last year, the Furman Center was cited multiple times, including references to both our neighborhood data profiles and one of our focus reports. So actually in this table that I have up on the screen, all of that demographic data is from our report directly. And I have to say this kind of use is really important to us because it reflects that the report is not just descriptive, but it's actually informing real, current policy conversations, and it's a resource for policymakers. Our work can also help shape how issues are understood and debated over time. So this is our 2023 focus report, and it covered New York City's low-density neighborhoods, which take up about 45% of the city's land, but contain 28% of the population. And the report explored disparities in terms of where new housing, including affordable housing, is being built. And so that framing then helped inform broader conversations about the equitable distribution of development within the city, and more recently provided context for policy changes that make it easier to permit new affordable housing in neighborhoods that are lagging in new housing supply. So finally, our work often feeds directly into both public discourse and policy making. So our 2025 report on federal housing programs was covered widely in the media, but its findings were also submitted as testimony to the New York City Council. So in this case, what you can see is more of a spectrum of impact. So we're informing public understanding, but we're also directly contributing to policy discussions. So we've found that building this data infrastructure and analysis, it does take time and it takes sustained collaboration, but it can become an incredibly valuable resource for policymakers, practitioners, and the public. So I just want to say it's been a pleasure learning about the work that's underway here in Detroit. I'm really excited to see how these efforts to measure the state of housing in Detroit continue to evolve. And I'm excited to hear more from the folks working in this space today. I already got to do a little bit over breakfast. I'm really excited about the rest of the day. I have to say, one of the things that we've learned in putting together this report is that building this kind of shared data infrastructure is really a long-term and collaborative effort. And what it relies on is really strong partnerships across universities and government agencies and community organizations and other institutions, all of whom care deeply about the future of the city. So I'm especially looking forward to continuing this conversation with Martin Lavelle from the Federal Reserve Bank, whose work and perspective on housing and regional data issues I think is going to add a really important dimension to this discussion, so we can think more about what this kind of effort would actually look like in Detroit. So thank you again for having me. Appreciate it.